Hi, welcome to this How to On Drawing. I'm going to do this as a series, a mini series of how to draw. If you follow my vlogs, you'll know that 2 weeks ago I talked about drawing, learning how to shade. And this series is going to focus on learning how to shade, identifying lights and darks, and a bit about line drawing as well. Now I mentioned, again, if you saw the vlog, go back and watch it, I'll link it below. It just gives you a bit of context about what we're talking about today. I talked about being able to identify areas that need shading, how to shade, and how to blend softly as well, and also a bit about creating outlines. So I said that the first time I really remember understanding shading and dark and light was during my high school years, with my art teacher, Mr. Taylor, who has a channel, Mr. T's Artiness it's called. He commented on the video, he let me know a question I had, an answer I had a question to. So I said in that video, I very clearly remember the moment I learnt to shade as being looking at this Marmite drawing, this illustration of Marmite pouring out of a jar of Marmite, and the light and dark on it, and we drew that, and that was the first time it really clicked. And I think it was the light and dark in that really helped me understand it a bit better. So I said we were going to do the same thing. I also said I couldn't remember who the illustrator was, and I could not find the image. So Mr. T told me the illustrator was Michael English. If you're familiar with Michael English, wonderful illustrator. It reignited a lot of memories for me when he told me the name. So I've been flicking through Michael English's images for the last few days. However, neither of us can find the image that we're talking about in terms of the Marmite pouring out of the Marmite jar that he used. So it must be in one of his books, and it must be one that isn't shared as often for whatever reason. So what I have done is I have taken photographs of a Marmite jar. I've taken several photographs, and I've taken a photograph of Marmite pouring out of a Marmite jar. So the way we're going to structure this is I'm going to do a lesson today on getting started with this drawing, and then we'll do one on we'll go further into shading, and then we'll go into blending, and then if we need a fourth one, we'll do a bit more on finalising your drawing. We'll see how it goes. I don't want these to be too long. I don't want you to feel like you're trapped drawing. Obviously pause and come back to these whenever you want if you find them useful. But today we're gonna start the drawing, which is the scariest part of drawing. The scariest part of drawing is starting the drawing. So for this, I am going to use a 3H pencil. I always use a 3H pencil to start my drawings, at least a 3H. Sometimes I use a 4H, but we're going to start with a 3H. If you don't have a 3H, a 2H will do. If you don't have a 2H, a HB will work. Just don't press too hard. And that's the rule with starting all drawings, is don't press too hard. So if you've only got a HB, that is absolutely fine. You can make it work. You can do shading with HBs. We'll go along. We'll do this together. We'll learn together. If you have got a 2H or a 3H or even a 4H if you want it, wonderful. Use that. I've also got my pencil sharpener because I like you need your pencil nice and sharp, and an eraser or rubber. Mine's mechanical. A non-mechanical one will do. So what we've got here, I've got my iPad, I've taken some photographs of Marmite. This is just a Marmite jar. You can see it's been opened. This is quite nice, that's going to be nice to draw. I've also just done it slightly to the side, so we've got a different angle. And then I've got one as well with Marmite pouring out of the jar. Put a bit of cling film down so it didn't get messy. I didn't waste any Marmite, don't worry. No Marmite was wasted in the production of this video. If you don't like Marmite, that's all right. You can still draw along if you want to. So I think we're going to start. We're going to work from this drawing. I think if you're just starting out, this is a bit too complicated. This will take quite a while. There's a lot of perspective to get right, and I think at the moment it might be a bit too much. So as a start, we're going to do this one. This is the image we're going to use. The images I'm using, I'm going to pop in a Google Drive in a folder, and I'll pop the link to them in the description for this video. If you want to use those images as your reference image, amazing. You can print them out, you can pop them on your laptop, your tablet, whatever you want to do. You can use those images. If not, you can use your own jar of Marmite as a reference. You can take your own pictures if you want to get used to doing that as well. or you can just get a reference image off Google. There's plenty of Marmite images on Google, I'm sure. So all I've got here is a white sheet of paper stuck to a drawing board. Now a drawing board is just, it's just a piece of wood, flat board. I've got that, it's got a sheet of paper stuck to it. I know the masking tape isn't straight, doesn't need to be, we're not worried about it. So just got a sheet of paper stuck to a drawing board. You can use a sketchbook, you can use whatever paper you want. This is just what I've got. It's just a spare sheet of paper that I had. So I've also got, you want it to be fairly bright, you want to be able to see your paper nice and bright. I've got some lights up in here. If you watch me regularly, you know that I've normally got an easel with some easel lights, but that's got a big drawing on it at the moment, so I've just got a little table easel. I'll show you that there. So you don't need one of those. If you can prop up your drawing board or your sketchbook, great. If not, don't worry, you can use it flat on the table. I prefer to work with my surface upright because it means that the perspective is right. If you draw flat down, your perspective will be off a little bit. It's harder to get your perspective right. It's much easier to get your perspective right and be more accurate upright. At first, it feels a bit unnatural to draw upright because obviously you write with your sheet of paper down, but eventually you'll get used to it, you'll see better results, and it'll start to feel weird drawing flat as well. So where do we start? Like I said, the scariest part of any drawing is starting it, and it is intimidating, but there is no pressure to get this perfect. It doesn't have to be perfect, it doesn't have to be a photograph, it doesn't, you can go back in and fix it later on if you want, but for now we just want to get started. So we start on this one. What I'm going to do is I'm going to mark out the top and the bottom a little bit. So the bottom has got a little curve on it, just a little curve, and we'll go for about the middle, and I'm going to hold my pencil towards the base, towards the end of it, and I'm only going to hold it very lightly. I'm not going to put any pressure down, really. I just want to make a very light little mark on the paper. I'm not pressing hard at all, and that is just a little slightly curved line, and you can see. Something I really dislike in drawing is when people go backwards and forwards to make the line. I think it's quite messy. It's much better if you very softly just sketch out your line rather than going backwards and forwards. It's quite messy. Okay, so we've got that there. It's got a little tiny lip on it. Okay, and we think the edges, you can use your pencil to measure this out a bit. So looking at your image, where I'm looking there, that measures quite nicely to the side. So I'm going to pop that mark about there. That's probably about as far out as that goes. And then on the other side, that's about as far out as that goes. So I'm going to say that's my edges. There, again, doesn't need to be perfect. We can come back to it later and fix it if we need to. Okay, and then we know that that'll go about up there. And this is something you learn as well. You learn to sort of judge shape and size a little bit better. The more you do this, the more practice you get. This isn't something that you just expected to be able to know and do overnight. If you can, amazing, that's great, but if not, don't worry about it. Okay, and then we've got a straight bit here, so I'm just going to mark that off. So that, if you look on your image here, move the light reflection out the way, the jar's neck lines up with the jar's base there. So you can use where you've drawn your base and just line that up. So when we're drawing, we're looking for reference points like that, points we can use to just make sure that everything's staying in scale and everything's accurate as we want it to be. So that's about where that is. It's quite, in the middle there, it's actually quite tall. That's actually quite a big gap. And again, you can use your pencil to measure these things. So that is actually taller than the tip of my pencil to the black bit. It actually goes to about there on the black bit. So I can use my pencil there just to mark out where that is. And I know this isn't exactly the same size as this, but it's not far off. So we can use that. And then again, on the edges, we can say, okay, the bottom of the yellow goes up to about here on my pencil. So when we're over on this side, we can just mark that off on either side. And then we know that this curve is quite a dramatic curve. And I think if you were to draw that just without measuring it, you probably wouldn't realise what a dramatic curve that actually is. And there we go, again, just very, very lightly, we're not putting any pressure down. And that tucks around the outside there. And you can see it's quite dramatic, so we will just soften it up a little bit. We don't want it to be, we want it to be nice and smooth. And again, just nicely draw that. There we go. Okay, and the lid, measure that again. The top of the lid to the bottom of the lid on the corner there is just about the length of the wooden bit of my pencil. So I'm just going to pop that little mark in there and that little mark in there. And then it's a little bit taller there, so I'll just pop a little mark in there. And then again, we can just use that just to mark where the lid is going. And then we can just draw the edges of our lid in there. So that's actually probably a little bit more dramatic than I've drawn it. That's, yeah, it is. That should be a lot more down there. And you do, yeah, you can get a sense of it pretty quickly if you're right or wrong. You notice it pretty quickly. And like I say, it doesn't matter if you have to double up on your lines at this point. That's fine. Just, and when I talk about going backwards and forwards to do your shading, I'll get this scrap bit of paper. I see a lot of people doing this to draw the lines, and it makes your lines really dark and really thick, and you don't want that. You just want to do a nice soft backwards and forwards rather than this backwards and forwards. It makes it quite draggy. Anyway, right. Okay, so we've got the basic shape there. We're going to add in the gaps here. So we know that a Marmite jar is pretty round. We do have this bit, so the very front bit of the jar is actually much more circle, and it goes quite long here. So we can almost make that bit quite long. It's not quite round. It's much more almost like an urn shape rather than it's not a circle. It's a little bit off. And then here we'll just add in. Again, it's not exactly a circle. There's an element of it being a bit stretched. Not quite an egg, not quite a circle. But on the face of it, we'll go into these a little bit later. We've got these bits where there's a circle on the face of the jar. So we're not going to fully draw them in now, but we might just mark them off a little bit as a reference point there. Just as the outside of the circle. Okay, so there we go, we've got the shape. It's not perfect, that is definitely not in the middle, and I can see that already. Something that helps quite a lot if you're drawing, take your eyes off it for a minute and look back at it, and it'll just refocus you, and you can just reset your gaze on it a little bit, and it just helps you figure out again where stuff is. Now, this is very much not accurate. I've done that side too long, I think. Yes, definitely too long. So I can shorten that. I can just bring it in by probably about 1/2 centimetre. I think that is probably out by. Drop the corners on it a little bit. That side feels a bit better. That feels quite long still. And that side is possibly a bit short. So let's add a little bit more to it there. Okay. And we're not too worried about this. Like I say, this doesn't need to be perfect, but that feels better already. Okay, so now that we've tidied it up a little bit, well, we can keep tidying it up if we want to. I'm just going to add a little bit more pressure to these lines and tidy it up a bit as we go along as well. So you can see as well here we've got this lip on the jar, so we can add that in slightly now. So it goes around the corner at this point there isn't too much to add in. We just want to add the shape into the outside of the jar. So I'm just going to pop the corners of it in there. Okay, and it actually goes quite far down the neck of the jar there, and I'm going to put a little bit more pressure on here to make it a bit darker. Okay, and we can't see it in the middle because that's where the sticker is, so I'll just put a little reference mark in for now, making sure that we remember that this line needs to be quite it's quite circle, it's not straight at all. We need to make sure that that is reflected all the way round, not just at the start and end. So okay, and then we've got this label here which peels off a bit, so we can put that in as a nice reference point. It's a bit diagonal where it's teared off. Again, not putting it in perfectly just yet, just as a reference point. There we go. Up on the top of the lid, making that a bit darker now. We're not going to add in all of the details of the lid yet. We're just going to keep adding in these little reference points. So the top of the label is there, and that goes across. It's quite flat. Don't worry about the line being lost in the other lines there, that's all right. And then it comes down a little way, nearly to the bottom, and then it has this bend in it where it's peeled back here. And we'll just add a rough line in there. It's not a straight line, it's a rough line. And then that has a little tiny edge on it there. And again, we'll add more detail into that later. I think one thing people quite often get caught up on when drawing is trying to finish each area at once. And if you do that, then you'll end up with a little bit of your drawing that's really good, and then you might carry on, and by the time you get to here, you've realised that you've completely lost perspective, or you've completely lost the size and scale of it. So you've got to go back and fix the rest of it. So rather than do that, add in your reference points and just keep going lightly rather than going in all at once. Okay, so I'm not 100% happy with the shape of this. I've got it a little bit wrong, I think, but I'm not too worried about it. This doesn't need to be perfect. If I wanted it to get perfect, I wouldn't draw it once. I'd probably draw it a few times anyway. This is just a learning drawing. So I'm just going to add in at the edges where I think the edge of the sticker would be. And I think actually on this one, where the edge of the sticker would be, is probably where I'd originally put that line in. So edge of the sticker there. On the bottom, it's actually quite high up, so I put that little reference mark in for where the bottle is still quite straight, and so it's above that even, so it's about there. And then of course on the label it just goes either side. And then I'm just very lightly making sure that I'm a good distance away, an equal distance away from the edge of the jar all the way around. I'm just going to add a very faint circle for the edge of the label. Okay, and on this side. Now the tricky thing about Marmite jar is that it's not all perfectly circle, it's not perfectly sphere. It does have, like I said, a bit of a squashed circle element to it, which does make it just a little bit trickier. But it also means we've got a bit more room for error. So there we go, just very lightly added in where I think the edge will be. And then underneath that we've got that ribbon that says Marmite on it. So just here I'm going to put a little line, and then on the edges, now that is quite hard to measure, so we're just going to guess a little bit. And the Marmite ribbon is, as you can see, got a lot of perspective in it. It goes narrow, goes wider in the middle, and then narrow again. And it comes down to not quite halfway down this label. So I think that's probably about halfway. Then we've got the yeast extract bit, and then we've got where that bottom ribbon is there, maybe about there. And it's a bit of a softer line. It's not as harsh. It's not as harsh as the top line is in terms of it being a circle. So I just very lightly add that in, and then that's a much more rounded line that goes either side. So I'll pop that in, and then a straight line down, straight line down, connect it, and then it's got a little triangle just off either side, and then it goes back out again. So the key to this was making sure that we respected that ends, it doesn't go, and then it gets narrower. So if we'd have tried to do this, say that gap in the middle is probably about 1 inch, and then this here is probably about 2/3 of an inch. So we needed to just remember that we needed to give ourselves enough room at the ends as well to add that in, and that worked quite well. Okay, and then we've got the yeast extract right in. I'm not going to add that in yet, that's too much detail. But then we've got this little pot in the middle. So a pot within a pot, and we can zoom in here. If you are using an iPad or a tablet or a laptop, of course you can zoom in to check your detail. If you're printing out this image and using it as a printed image, obviously you can't zoom in, but it might be worth you printing it out in different sizes, or even enlarging certain bits of it if you want to be able to see certain bits of it. But in the middle here, we've got a pot within a pot. So I'm just going to mark out the little lid. Now that is just a little squashed circle on top with a little rim on it. And then again, I'm just going to lightly pop the lines in here. I'm not going to go too heavy at all. And just pop the little semicircle lid in there. Hopefully you can see this okay. And then put the little rim of the lid on. And then it's got a nice curve in it, really nice curve here. So it's quite dramatic as well, this curve actually. One thing that quite often happens when drawing is people downplay the dramatic elements of things. So it's got a nice curve in it, and sometimes people, I think, will be tempted to not emphasize that curve enough. Quite often you see things in real life and you think, if I drew that, it'd look wrong. And this is quite a good example of that. You think, if I drew that, it'd look wrong, but but then it works out, it looks all right. Now I've not got that 100% at all, but it doesn't matter. It doesn't need to be perfect. And then it's got its little spoon handle sticking out there, which I actually found much harder than than anticipated. Okay, and that's not quite flat, so I'll just go in there. And again, because we're going to be shading this, it doesn't really matter that we're duplicating lines, that we've got a bit of a messy bit there, because it is going to be shaded anyway. Okay, and then we've got the green banner at the bottom, so that's goes quite close to the bottom of that. It doesn't quite hit the bottom of the label, so it's probably about there. And it comes out about here, and again on this side it's about there. So do the bottom line first, just trying to maintain the same distance to the edge of the label all the way around. on the inside. Now this bit is actually quite tricky. There's not much reference. There's not many reference points to use off this, and we're adding a shape into the middle of quite a few other shapes, so it is a bit tricky there. And that is definitely not. It's not photo accurate at all, but it'll do. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the lettering, and I am not good at lettering, I'll be honest with you now. So one thing we need to remember with this jar is that the outline, it's actually got quite a thick outline to it, and when I was drawing, I was working off the edge of this black outline. So this black outline here, the shapes I was measuring was from the edge of this black outline. So we need to remember that this has a black outline within it. If we wanted to, we could draw in that black outline, just to make sure that we've got enough space for it. And I'm not going to draw in, I don't mean I'm going to colour it in, I mean I'm going to actually draw in the outline. I'm not going to shade it in yet, we're not doing that for a little while. At the moment, this is just a line drawing, no shading, just the lines. What we're not going to do is treat this like writing, and we're not going to write Marmite. We are going to draw the shape of the word, of the letters. We are not writing the word Marmite. We are drawing the shape of the letters. So when you are drawing, remember that you are drawing, you aren't writing. So what I'm going to do here is, there's a little R in the corner of this label, and that is quite handy for us. It gives us a bit of a reference point within this. So I've actually got a magnifying glass here that I can use, because this is quite a tiny detail. If you don't have a magnifying glass, then don't worry about it, just do your best. So I'm going to draw in the little circle very lightly. And I'm just going to, I'm not even going to fully write it in as an R. I'm just going to put the little shape in for now. And we can come back to this another time. But for now, it is just a little circle with a bit of a weird shape in it. And I don't even know if you can see that. There you go. You can just about see that. Okay, and like I say, that just gives us a bit more of a reference point within this. We know where to not, we know how to not go too far now. The E in the Marmite ends right on the edge of that R. So we can put a little dot there, and we can put a little dot at the top to mark where it ends there. And then on the M, we've got a little reference there for where the E starts. If you want to use a ruler here, that's fine, use a ruler. No one's going to be mad at you. Put a little dot where that starts, and then the M is a slightly diagonal line, only slightly diagonal. And we can use, so it ends just above where that corner ends. Can you see? So the M, corner of the M isn't quite in line with the corner of this. The corner of the E isn't quite in line with the corner of the E, so we just need to put that a bit higher. Okay. Very good. We've got 4 dots. So now let's start connecting those dots, shall we? Let's put the very lightly put the M in, and the letters are always the same distance away from this line. So just in the middle here, I'm going to estimate it's probably about 3 millimeters. I'm just going to put a little 3 millimeter reference point there for where I think they will end, and then a little 3 millimeter reference point just to the side of the middle where I think that M ends. And then what I'm going to do is draw a do you know what, I'm going to get a lighter pencil. If you've got a lighter pencil, get it out. If not, don't worry about it. You can just very, very, very lightly here go over it. So I've just grabbed a 6H, and I'm just going to very, very lightly mark in approximately, I'm hoping you can see that, I'll zoom you in, approximately where the edge of the shape of the letters is. Again, I'm just going to turn this so I've got full movement there. I don't know if you can hear me breathing, but I do breathe quite heavily when I'm drawing. Concentrating. Okay, so we've put that in super light there. And even this E is a little bit diagonal as well. So I'm just going to put that out a little bit more, make that a little bit more diagonal. Okay, at this point, we're going to have a little break. We've done quite a lot there. So we'll have a little break from this, and we will come back to these letters next time. If you want to carry on and have a go, please do, absolutely. Next time, we're going to do the letters. We're going to add a bit more detail into this label, and we'll start adding in the light and dark areas as well. Okay. So I hope that's been useful for now. Let me know how you've got on. Let me know if you're raring to go for the next part, or let me know if you just stopped and gave up instantly. And if I'm being clear enough as well. If I'm not being clear enough, if I'm not explaining something well, then please let me know. And if you've got any questions, then just drop them in the comments. And no question is a stupid question, so please do just send me a little message about stuff if you've got questions. Okay, right, we'll be back very soon.